So, it's Tuesday, March 12th, 2024. Just another day, right? Well, yeah, it is. But along comes a Vaknin video. The borderline life is worth living. A Technicolor Adventure, apparently. And the reason for this video, that will also be a podcast episode, is not me versus Vaknin. I'm not interested in any of that. It's simply, I think somebody, sometimes, and I tend to be that person, I don't know what other people do or don't do, but I believe that somebody needs to put out an alternative to what, in this case, Vaknin is saying in this video, in parts of this video, for sure. So that's the reason for this. It's not sour grapes, or he's got a huge channel and I don't, or he's got a higher IQ than I do, or whatever. I don't care about any of that. I just think it's important to be an alternative voice out here. One with a lot of experience, lived experience, education also, and 34 years worth of working with clients, wherein I feel what my clients are going through. I feel with them. I have compassion. I empathize with them. And sometimes I cry with them. And we work together to, I'm just a piece to help my clients to heal their pain and their trauma. And so it's a very different thing than whatever Vaknin has going on. I just really think there needs to be, for some people that don't swallow everything he says whole, which isn't always the wisest thing to do, there needs to be an alternative voice out here, and that's what I'm doing with this. Nothing less, nothing more. Though I do believe strongly that when he goes to these places of almost incredulous inaccuracy, when one could say he knows better, intellectually, of course he knows better, but emotionally, does he know better? I don't know. Well, I'm not here to say that people with BPD, they all are here. They deserve to live. They have all kinds of capability. If they choose, they can heal in therapy, but many don't choose that. But he makes it sound like only a malignant narcissist could make it sound, that the borderline woman, his idealization and intrigue with the borderline woman from the perspective of a malignant narcissist, he makes it sound like you should all just be, jumping into these relationships because borderlines are so creative, so intense, and apparently so enlightened. I know a lot of people with BPD are creative. They are definitely intense, and that's not always all on the negative side. But enlightened without a self, enlightened without self-awareness. Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't this Vakninian one often going on about the biology of BPD, like studies suggest, like they can't probe, like they haven't really backed up? Because again, I would suggest, I don't know, there could be some of that, but I would suggest all these studies are looking at a brain already traumatized. So, they're not really born that way, and then what happens? And the childhoods of about 87% of people with BPD have a lot of compassion for that, and for people with BPD. But when I'm speaking on this channel, largely the focus is all the reasons why you need not be in a trauma-bonded relationship with somebody with borderline personality. I'm never trying to say all these people or all people with BPD are absolutely horrible, or they don't deserve to live, or of course they can find a life worth living with treatment. But then he goes on to say, and or they'll just, they can get treatment. Why be so hopeless? That's a good point. But the other part is, well, they can also just spontaneously remit, or it goes away. Now, this just boggles my mind, but I guess a lot of people with BPD want to hear it. Do a lot of people who are still trying to love a borderline, been in a long-term relationship with somebody with BPD that just isn't working out for all the reasons they don't? And when I talk about the reasons they don't, or the things that people with BPD might be going through, or how they might present to you in relationships, it's never to say these people shouldn't be here. Of course they should. And of course the hope is they will find their way to treatment and a life worth living. through DBT or other modalities of treatment. But SB just goes on like in this way that almost everything else he's ever said about borderline personality disorder can be tossed now, which isn't the way he works. He works basically in all of his brilliance and whatever. And I'm not saying he's always wrong with what he says, but this is the stuff of what a malignant narcissist is going to say to people, and people are going to swallow whole if they're not discerning enough, because the borderline life, people with BPD, yes, their lives are valuable and have meaning and matter, and the hope is that they will get treatment and seek treatment and be able to find self and not suffer so much. But does that mean, like what Vaknin was going on about, that they're just basically they're so creative, they're so intense, which both are true. Enlightened, I'm not so sure about. But the thing is, no matter what he said there, I don't disagree with everything he said there at all. Like the borderline life is worth living, or people with BPD, yes, keep living, seek treatment, find a life worth living, as Dr. Marshall Linehan first said. But not the way that Vaknin's talking about it, because he's kind of inviting people to, it seems to me, to get into those relationships. What could be the problem? It's going to be an adventure, I think, is part. Technicolor Adventure is the other part of his title. It's going to be a Technicolor adventure, right, that will subsume you if you are the loved one. That will, unfortunately, in more cases than not, maybe not all cases, will traumatize you. Will see you in a trauma bond wherein people with codependency are, from childhood, have kind of, not literally, but your wires are crossed sort of in your brain, not literally, but it's just a way to put it, that you don't know the difference emotionally down deep between love and abuse, because so many people with codependency have suffered in childhood, have woundedness from childhood, and often from a borderline or narcissistic parent, wherein when you're at that young age of childhood development, when you're in young ages of childhood, we need the parent. We need the parents because they are the world to us. And what are we going to do as a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old without parenting, right? We need them, but yet they fail us, and or they hurt us, and or people with codependency have other types of woundedness in childhood from parents that present unhelpful in ways that really hurt and wound children. I'm not sure if this is what he intended, or if he just wants to get popular with more of the borderline ladies because he's a malignant narcissist. So another point that I think is really worth saying something about that Vaknin makes in that video.
There's a price to pay for intensity, even when it is totally healthy, let alone when some of its roots are pathological. But still, the borderline has a profound, intimate relationship with life. The borderline is overwhelmed by her own wealth of emotions, by her own internal processes. That's quite true. But because of that, she is intimately and intricately acquainted with them.
Actually, not intimately acquainted with them. Actually, a lot of that experience in what he just described is deep pain and suffering. And he also says that he thinks the term dysregulation is just like a term that is somewhat pejorative or something, when actually to realize the struggle and dysregulation of people with BPD who are not only living, experiencing life in a lot of intensity, which is really the burden, not the positive of their lives untreated. It's so important to realize that that's not a positive, and that is something that leads a lot of people with BPD to want to unalive themselves because they don't have the coping skills or the defense mechanisms to deal with all of that emotionality. And some of it can be beautiful, and a lot of it goes off into dissociative or triggered, dysregulated, heavy-duty emotions that are more tainted by the trauma that most people, 87% of those diagnosed with BPD, have been through in their lives, than it is anything that's experienced in a positive way. So I wonder, him being a malignant narcissist, what does he really feel, if anything, right? So he can't really relate to the feelings he's describing and what happens for people with borderline personality disorder when they have all this overwhelm and how intensely they're experiencing these emotions, which is true, but usually very, very all-consuming, scary, and traumatizing for people inside of themselves with BPD. Maybe he can't appreciate that because malignant narcissists and beyond are much more defended against feeling any of those emotions. But I think, because he doesn't really reference himself in that I kind of way, because he doesn't feel, it seems to me, much, if anything, which is typically what is said about malignant narcissists. And even sometimes narcissists in general who don't reach malignant narcissist and what that means, because they have a much more profound defense, stronger defense mechanisms and a stronger false self, and therefore their seeking supply is always to fill that between the void of the pain that they, like the borderline, could maybe feel, but they don't, because in BPD people have, yes, they do feel a lot and they are overwhelmed, but the positive part of that is that's what makes them more treatable if they will seek treatment. That's what makes the prognosis for people who will seek treatment with BPD very positive, as he says. But I have trouble listening to a malignant narcissist who doesn't have access to those kind of feelings and may never have felt them in his life because they would annihilate him. I have trouble listening to his describing them and then saying, but like all healthier women, it's boredom. And so it's something, what, quote, extra special, unquote, for women with BPD, that they should feel all of this to the point where they end up wanting to unalive themselves because they can't cope, and because it's not all lollipops and rainbows, and because most of it is really incredible suffering, and it's not anything that one could accurately describe in the throes of active borderline personality disorder and emotional overwhelm or intensity of feeling emotion that is positive or life-sustaining or producing the worth of life for people with BPD. I find that very errant, and I happen to know that personally from my own experience when I was, 40 plus years ago and when I was younger. And that's a difference. It's a major difference between people who've had and recovered or who have BPD and someone like Vaknin, is that he can't appreciate the feelings. So a lot of what he says to me rings hollow in general in that part of the video, but in general, because he's somebody who's talking about how people might feel often in many videos without ever getting to the feelings in any specific way, because he doesn't know what they are and he can't experience them. And I don't say that with any acrimony. It's just that's what malignant narcissistic personality disorder is about. So that they are so defended, they're not experiencing all the emotional overwhelm that borderlines do. And that's a big delineating factor between BPD and NPD, and one that makes people with BPD, although it's not a simple process or a short process, but what makes the prognosis for those who will seek and stick with treatment with BPD so positive versus the malignant narcissist.
She is intimately and intricately acquainted with them. She goes through life tasting and smelling and digesting and getting immersed in every element, component, ingredient. Her life is a Technicolor movie, while the lives of healthy people are black and white.
He says that, I believe, because he's a malignant narcissist who has envy for all that he just described about borderline women and what they could feel, but puts in the lens as if it's like a happy thing, a positive thing. And it isn't. I guess it's probably better than being a malignant narcissist and not knowing anything about that from a feeling perspective. But it's a lot of that deep emotional experience in the life of a person with borderline personality disorder that ends up in their complete overwhelm, and sometimes more than just being triggered to dysregulation and having really horrific and difficult episodes to cope and survive, but sometimes it's actually something that will push people to unalive themselves tragically, because it's not like they're drinking in life in some amazing way, unfortunately. It is a further breaking down and a re-experiencing of so many negative, traumatic emotions. And sometimes the flip side of that, for some people with BPD, they can experience almost like a bipolar manic type of profound, insightful to a degree, but you got to remember all that he's saying about this. What's troubling about it for me, that I care to comment on, is the fact that people with BPD aren't that aware of this. Not when like when they could be feeling what he might be alluding to that might not be negative or really, really hurtful. They're not so much experiencing it in some positive way. They're usually drowning in it. And it can be a reason why so many unalive themselves, because it's not this like really fantastic, good experiences. And the thing about that is, as I know I experienced even with just 4 strong core traits when I was growing up and in, through my 20s, and all that therapy and the recovery by 30, etc., is the pain in that technicolor loudness of emotion is enormous, because a lot of it is going to be predicated on things that go back to the trauma in childhood. And this trauma starts often for people with BPD, and I believe it did for me. It started when I was days to months old. And that means a lot, because there's ways to understand that even when one can't recall that. We don't remember being days old or months old, or we don't usually remember much prior to like 2.5 to 3, if even that. But there are ways through the story of the family of origin, and what they will say was the case of my family of origin, and things that they're saying that aren't what you want to hear, and that are very not supportive. They're very much the opposite, as most people with that kind of childhood who are going to go on to be labeled like I was or diagnosed with BPD. You're the scapegoat. You're the black sheep. You're taking, as in my case, you're taking on just a crap load of abuse, as in my case, many others, from 2 cluster B parents. And there was no love there, and there was no affection, and there was nothing positive, and the intensity then builds through this negative lens of the interjected object other of like negative parents that never said anything to you, never saw you, never heard you, in the case of many with BPD. So I find that this is really, I don't know what to say it is, but it's almost like unfathomable to me at this point what he's going on about with this, because, and then he compares, so the borderline woman, as he's always saying, but people with BPD, whether they're male or female, somehow having all this emotion is rich and like the cusp of being so alive, when really that's not how people with BPD usually experience those emotions, that Vaknin can't understand that in an emotional lens. And I guess the other part of this is he thinks that therefore means, or ipso facto means, that the borderline is, going to be such a more exciting person to relate to, because he's a malignant narcissist. Lots of narcissists very much attracted to the borderlines from the other side of the whole equation. If you're codependent and you adopt his attitude and his platitudes and what he's saying here, that I don't believe stands on its own at all as being really accurate, that then you're going to get crushed by that person with BPD who's lost to themselves and constantly in defense, fearing abandonment, having engulfment anxiety, not knowing self, being lost, and so the weight of all that he tries to describe is so positive versus healthier women or men without BPD are boring. Well, that just kind of speaks to the fact that, Vaknin is still, and as a malignant narcissist always will be, riveted to the interplay between a narcissist and a borderline, which works more for the narcissist usually than the borderline, but is something that you, as a codependent who's not a cluster B, you can't walk that path the way or from the perspective that someone like Vaknin might walk that path because of the annihilator in him that isn't in you. So I just really believe that this isn't going to be helpful to people overall, but each person will interpret it as they will interpret it, and they will either delineate and say, whoa, I don't know about this, or people with BPD even probably more susceptible to what he's saying there, because it seems to be so validating for people with BPD, and yet it's not describing most of the experience of what it means with all that intensity and those emotions without a self, and what people with BPD are really truly, how they really truly experience that, and how devastatingly dangerous it is to their survival, how they experience what he's describing there in some out of context way, in my humble opinion.
She has the power to give others stimulation, motivation, and satisfaction or gratification.
Well, okay, for a time in a relationship, but not overall, and not consistently, congruently, nor do these relationships work out. But there sounds to me, dare I say, a malignant narcissist and perhaps beyond, longing to feel something that he can describe. Well, he's erroneous here, but he describes a lot from his intellect, but he sounds like what he's saying there is more true about himself longing for that, and how much he probably has related to or been in relationships with, or may only be in relationships with borderline women.
Creativity, intensity, and the last gift is enlightenment. Precisely because the borderline is empty inside. She is like a receptacle, like a container.
Like the narcissist garbage bin, perhaps? Who he, as a malignant narcissist, would love to write on that blank slate, if in fact that's what that is for people with BPD, because they're so enlightened they don't know themselves. What is he talking about? But this sounds to me very, what word do I use? Dark. Sounds dark to me.
Open to taste, open to experience, open to amalgamate and aggregate, open to divest herself of what other people call ego. She is open. That's why borderlines are very adventurous and very dramatic, because they are very much like a blank canvas on which others can paint. The borderline is there to absorb everything, to assimilate.
Does that give others the right to paint on the borderline canvas when they need to find out who they are? Because part of recovery from BPD is people being helped by therapists and therapy to paint on that canvas for themselves. It is, after all, each and every one of their own individual canvases. It is about who they are as precious children of God. It's not about some malignant narcissist who's going to get yippies out of writing on the blank slate of a borderline and controlling them. The borderline narcissist coupling, that trauma bond on steroids, sounds like he salaciously needs it, salaciously wants it, and in a really dark way, what? He's going to respect it and revere it? No, he's going to annihilate it for his own supply. I find this very dark. I find it very troubling.
Integrate. The borderline is like a Rorschach test, like a litmus test. She's
a Rorschach test. She's a litmus test for what? A preying, malignant narcissist, or a psychopath, or a comorbidity, both. And no person with BPD deserves that kind of abject abuse, though he romanticizes and tries to make it all sound like it's something quite far from what it would be and what it is when people with BPD get into relationships with somebody like Vaknin.
A catalyst of wisdom and enlightenment in others. And sometimes this comes at a horrible price. The borderline can be very hurtful, very damaging, can break you.
But when he's saying that about a horrible price, can be damaging, can break you, he doesn't believe that that's, from his perspective, again, as a malignant narcissist, it's not going to break him. But for a codependent, yeah, it breaks many, many a codependent. I've worked with thousands of them.
But there is learning in loss. There is growth in pain. There is personal evolution in hurt.
Yes, but none of that's going to be because of what the borderline bestowed on you or because of that fantastic experience with the person with BPD that goes so south. It's going to be because you enter your own healing recovery journey and you learn to stop focusing on the borderline, and you will find many gifts there and much to be grateful for. But it's not because of the person with BPD. It's not something that they gift you with. They gift you with pain. They gift you with trauma. And it doesn't seem like a gift at the time, does it? It sounds like crazy language. But it can become that when you're working through your healing and recovery, when you are no contact from that person with BPD. I find what he's saying here to be really, really dangerous for people.
The borderline brings on these alchemical processes of the mind in herself and in others.
Inner lost self, eh?
And because she is so wide open, sorry for the metaphor,
disgusting.
Because she's so wide open, and because she has no...
There, a little bit of light shines through. A little bit of malignant narcissist misogyny shines through. She's so open. Oh, sorry for the metaphor.
Core, on a stable core. She resonates like no one else. She's able to merge and fuse, not only in bad ways, but in good ways.
No, not good ways, not healthy ways.
She's able to bring out in others their core, their identity.
If you're a malignant narcissist without that, A, she's not going to bring it out in you, but I guess B, that's his hope.
Their dreams. In this sense, borderlines are kind of a dream come true.
Borderlines, unfortunately, in relationship to those who aren't narcissists and psychopathic, they're not going to deliver all this to the narcissist, malignant narcissist or psychopath. But to the codependent, unfortunately, sadly, borderlines aren't dreams. They're nightmares. What is this man going on about? Consider his perspective throughout this, please. If you're not a narcissist, then you'd better not adhere to believing what he's saying, because it's coming from an opposite side and something that codependents can't even fathom. It'll become your worst nightmare. It will not be a dream. Maybe for a narcissist. Obviously for this one, Vaknin, it sounds like the borderline woman is a wet dream for him. Seriously.
Idealizing people with borderline personality disorder.
He's not, he says.
Sharing your life with a borderline, or sharing even a relationship with a borderline, is an onerous experience. It's difficult. The borderline is high maintenance. The cost is sometimes catastrophic. But the borderline is a creature of light because she is so ephemeral. She's vapor, not flesh. And she's creative. And she's intense.
And right there, ladies and gentlemen, is the meat of his message. A malignant narcissist psychopath objectifying a borderline or all borderline women. That is not something that anybody with codependency will find healthy or dream-worthy. It is unhealthy, it is toxic, and it is a nightmare. And sorry to say that because I don't mean to be implying that people with BPD are just awful. I don't agree with the online all over the place vilify them and make them all, people with BPD, into, narcissists and psychopaths and everything else under the sun. You just heard a malignant narcissist, apparently, according to his own documentary, also a psychopath. The documentary used to be called I, Psychopath. It's on YouTube still. It's now called Am I a Psychopath? Probably because he made them change the title because he felt like walking it back. Watch that and see the way that Sam Vaknin behaves when he's at his most, quote, inauthentic, but narcissistic psychopathic best. He just objectified what he dreams of. And what I'm going to say again is a wet dream for him. And could codependent men or women, could codependent men experience a borderline woman that way in the beginning and for a time? Yeah. And can women experience a borderline male like that for a time? I'm sure. But it's only a narcissist or a malignant narcissist that will believe that that is a dream versus a nightmare, because someone like him wants somebody like a borderline, and all his descriptions about people with BPD here, women with BPD, they're open. The metaphor of even legs open. You go in there, so to speak, right? And that's the undoing of so many men, and maybe in a way women, but the undoing of so many men who are losing themselves to these relationships and can't stop going back because literally their openness in that regard, the sex, is so fantastic and addicting. What is this guy on about? And I would challenge you to not swallow whole what this dude is talking about, because it's coming from his pathology. It's coming from that view of a malignant narcissist and beyond's ideal dream of why the blank slate of a borderline woman. Why? Because they just objectify and use as an object anybody they're with. Just look at all the videos out there about how the narcissist and the malignant narcissist, which he is, how they torture and abuse people ad infinitum. That includes the borderlines that he is trying to make sound better than, relationship-wise, I mean, better than, and healthier for you, or better for you, than an averagely healthy woman. And there's no way that's the truth. In his video, Borderline's Life is Worth Living, Technicolor Adventure, Vaknin also talks about psychoticism being a major factor in BPD. Well, it isn't for a lot of people with BPD. Might be with some, but the general, more experienced reality for a lot of people with BPD isn't so much psychoticism, can be for some, as I said, but it's neuroticism, and that's wholly different from psychoticism. And so the other point that he's making is that people with BPD experience life more intensely. Yes, they do, but he's trying to make that sound like lollipop and rainbows, and it's not. It's a lot of pain. It's a lot of brokenness. It's tremendous woundedness and a loss of self. And so that doesn't really sit well with how he's trying to describe it overall. And I don't say that to demean people with BPD or to in any way have somebody with BPD that might come along and see this feel worse, And like Vaknin said in the beginning of that video, that he hears from a lot of people with BPD who say that what he says in videos, in their opinions, right, in their experience, make them feel like they want to unalive themselves, etc. I get a lot of those comments as well, but I think that rather than try to do a video placating what happens to people who get in relationships with people with untreated borderline personality disorder, it's the way that I handle that is just to understand, and I do have compassion, but you can't right fight with a person with BPD when they're right fighting, because their experience is painful and all-consuming and extremely intense, but a lot of that's going to be on the sort of negative side, as Vaknin alluded to part of that. And when people with BPD say that to me, I would rather respond, and have responded many times to comments with people with BPD who say that, oh, what I say makes them want to unalive themselves. There's no correlation there, but is it in Vaknin's malignant narcissist grandiosity that he actually thinks he has that power? Because we don't have that power. And what people with BPD feel is real to them, although often not exactly grounded in a reality because they lack self, again, which matters. But if they hear things and they feel like, that means they should unalive themselves, there's no logical correlation between what they heard and then how they feel. They've been triggered, and they need to learn what that means so they can get help and keep pursuing and finding that life worth living. And he really puts the word voluptuous in a place where it doesn't belong, so I don't know, I'll let you work that one out, Freudian, I have no idea. BPD, this information about BPD, which he is a big person who talks a lot about it, big person, I don't know, big intellect gone awry that often is contradicting itself. And whatever. Professor, huh? Sure. Anyway, so he makes it sound like you should just drop all the normal women. I know that most people watching these videos and his videos and etc. are probably with a BPD or MPD woman, but you should drop normal women if you're not, and hey, get with the borderline, because wow, it's so creative, it's so intense, and apparently they're so enlightened. Well, believe it or not, what I'm talking about on this channel is not to assail borderlines, people with BPD, is not to dehumanize them, is not to villainize them, is not to stigmatize them, because they do that quite well on their own, which is kind of a tragedy. It's really just to help other people realize why the relationships aren't working, what the dynamics are, and what people with BPD untreated, or the patterns of, and maybe not diagnosed, what they bring to the table and why. So that's really what I'm trying to explain to people. I'm not trying to say so they're all horrible and they don't deserve to be here. Not at all. I have compassion for people with BPD. But just as my last video, if you watch that, you might see I'm always patient with clients, by the way. I don't ever judge a client. But on social media, some of the things I hear and see, and the way that commenter complained about, and was all messed up about cognitively distorted, etc., and sort of the religiosity of like God will just pave the way for you with their codependency, I pretty much was, I hope, somewhat compassionate, but I'm not sure the delivery style indicates that. But I'll call out codependence too, because it's all about trying to help people, to keep it real, to help people heal. So today he recommends apparently that they're just great. I mean, I'm just kind of giving you my impression of the video, and he can say whatever he wants, and people, eat it up whole. And when I saw it, apparently it just came, I was like 4 minutes after he put it up, which is quite an accident because I don't go over there too often. But the thing is, he's really trying to make it sound like these people are amazing in ways, and they may have amazing qualities, people with BPD. Make no mistake about it. I don't tend to talk about that much here because I'm trying to help those who do watch my channel or listen to my podcast or resonate with me and might want to work with me. I'm not trying, I want to make sure not to be giving false hope, because I'm listening to clients all the time. We're talking about how they got hurt and traumatized by the person with BPD, what happened in your family of origin, all of that and more. But I'm hearing people say how much they're hurting because they really, love the person who they thought that the person with BPD was, but then they go on to say, but I still really care about that person. And you know what? In a measured way, when you're taking care of yourself and you're not in limerence or obsession with that BPDX, I think it's an amazingly compassionate thing to still care about a person with BPD that was in your life, or a parent, or a favorite that you were their favorite person, or a person, a relative with BPD, all the different relationship types. I'm never advocating for people to have hate. I advocate for people to forgive, but I also advocate for people to break the trauma bonds and to heal your codependency and to heal your family of origin, woundedness, etc. So, because it's not healthy to be in a relationship with the majority of these people with BPD. Now, there are people with BPD out there, they've healed. Their relationship, they're probably in successful relationships now. But it's the people with the patterns not yet diagnosed who could well be diagnosed. It's the people with BPD who deny it. And they're vast numbers of people. So he makes it sound like, and even says something about it being like amazing in romanticism or romantic relationship. And again, I'm paraphrasing, so I'm not quoting verbatim. And you know, that has its some reality in the sense that in the beginning, and what a person with BPD in particularly, as people are always talking about, the borderline woman, the hypersexuality, the sex, I mean, the wonderment that it is to men, because wow. And I've heard that for 34 years, and I totally understand that. So we're not trying to run borderlines into the ground here or say they don't deserve to live or that their lives can't be worthy, but the relationships don't work, you know, unless and until they really are not borderline anymore, right? Which takes years of therapy, because that's the other thing that he said again, that is like they can heal and recover in a year. Well, no, but this is the latest sort of BS studies, unproven pseudoscience going around, right? People saying, like Vaknin does out of one side of his mouth, this is pervasive and this is permanent, this is a personality disorder. And I'm not saying those things. And then says on the other side, but they're just going to be better. They're just going to be fine. Or maybe on and off, they're going to be better. And on and off, they're going to be fine. Even if that were true, and I don't believe it is, when they get back to the off part again, and the triggered, and the reacting to you, and the no personal responsibility taking, none of what he really said in that video today, other than people with BPD, of course, their lives are worth living, and they need to really get help and find ways to make life better for themselves and suffer less. But the relationships don't go along with what he said about their lives. And lots of people with BPD are creative, and they're highly intellectually intelligent, and they can do amazing things. And then a lot of people are blocked by BPD from doing that. But this idea that they're just going to age out of BPD, it's going to magically disappear. No, it's such pseudoscience. And I mean, I don't do studies, but I have the anecdotal evidence of that in my work with clients for 34 years. Many who've had BPD, or still do, but are doing much better. But all the people that have been so hurt and so traumatized by people with BPD. And listen, I'm one of the only people out here on YouTube that talks about how a lot of what a borderline can do in your life isn't necessarily always on purpose or planned or contrived, even when it's really, really traumatizingly awful. What happens? So he's talking about BPD in a way that I understand if he wants to, get some attention from a lot of people with BPD, that's a message you'd want to give, though it's not accurate. Dare I say, with my minimal IQ compared to his, I don't know. But I have lived experience, and I've healed and recovered I have empathy and I'm here with you guys in the emotional realm. He isn't. He's a malignant narcissist. And he tends to normalize narcissists, right? He tends to want to make a case that, oh, narcissistic personality disorder, he said this, isn't really like a problem or a hassle. What's your problem? Because it's an adaptation to the world today, which I still would disagree with. Now he's trying to give borderline personality that same boost of, quote, well, it's just an adaptation, because in his video from today, he said something about not that it's a natural adaptation, I forget the words he used, but nature wouldn't allow it to be if it wasn't, I don't know, something or other that matters or positive, or, which isn't true. I mean, I don't know about the nature part or the involvement part, but the relational part I know about. So no matter what people think of what he said, and, I mean, this is why I sometimes mention, and I don't want to anymore, because it drives me a little bit like when I watch, but the moments I'm watching, I'm like, what? Because that's the last thing. What he said today is the last thing. I support that people with BPD, they can find and they have lives worth living, and they need to learn that and know that. But why do so many of them not feel that way? Why is their unaliving rate so high, which is a tragedy, and nobody wants that? Because they don't know who they are. And without knowing who they are and having a stable sense of identity, there can be no love and healthy relationship, no mutuality, no reciprocity, no emotional, consistent, congruent relating to you the way that you might be trying to relate to and love and support and care about them. So I guess maybe this was, Vaknin's way of trying to normalize or hold up or something BPD like he has NPD in the past. But the problem with it, and again, borderlines, people with BPD who are alive, that's important. They all matter. They're human. They're going to go through a lot. They need to seek treatment. They're not going to age out of it. Remission is such a load of, like, people put it across there and what it really means. It's not the same as healing and recovering. However, nobody's just going to, like, all of a sudden not be borderline because they turn a certain age or the wind blows from the west instead of the east. So I have a lot of problems with that video, except that it is nice, but from a malignant narcissist, I don't know. But it is something that maybe we should do more of, in the sense of affirming the suffering and the reality that people with BPD go through, because I definitely do that. I mean, I don't know that I talk about it much, but I definitely have compassion for them and know that. Gee, I wonder why, right? But the point is, I try not to mix my messages here, because it can give people who really need to get out of a trauma bond relationship with somebody with BPD, maybe comorbid other things as well, that really doesn't know who they are and is really, really going to eat you alive, unfortunately, through their repetition compulsions, etc., which is largely unconscious. So I just needed to say something, and I know it's not the wisest thing for me to do, but I think his lens beyond the obvious, which is that people with BPD can find, and by the very fact and nature that they are alive, that matters. We'd like them to stay alive. We'd like them to find their way. We would like them to heal. We would like them to go to therapy. They have lives worth living. They are people who definitely deserve to live, people who have creativity, people who are emotional, but they are broken people through trauma and tragedy in childhood. That's not what, nobody asks for that, and I'm not here to run them into the ground. I'm just here to say that what he said in that video is, I believe, the perspective of a malignant narcissist, largely in the sort of veneration that perhaps one could say was there for borderline personality disorder. But I don't want to be saying anything to the opposite of that core of what he said about their life is, each person with BPD's life is worth living, though they have a hard time realizing that. A lot of them, they have a hard time coping with what they have to cope with, or learning to cope. They don't know who they are. It's this inherent woundedness, and then trauma affects the brain, and then all these researchers study the brains of BPD and all this, and they say this, that, and the other, But the bottom line is that's the effect of trauma. It's not that BPD is a biological entity or reality. It's not. I have high functioning I have Asperger's, what they used to call it. I have high functioning autism in that regard. I do pretty much okay, but I'm not neurotypical, which I kind of find fascinating and fine. But the point is, I went through all the healing recovery that I went through. I don't have any BP traits. I don't have any issues like that anymore. But even having gone through all that treatment, which really worked, and I found a life super worth living, but I never doubted that my life was worth living because I only had 4 core traits of BPD. But through all that healing work and all that I've learned since, and this really life worth living I've been experiencing and then some for the last 40 years of my life, it didn't take the autism out of my brain, because the autism is wired in, but the BPD isn't. And so there's just so much wrong with this information. And maybe sometimes people think I'm nuts out here saying this stuff because it seems so contrary, so unacademic, so unscientific. But it doesn't mean that I don't have that academic background, that I don't have that lens, that I don't read those studies, etc. Maybe not as much as him, or I don't think my IQ is anywhere as high as his, okay? Like, I don't have a problem saying that. But a malignant narcissist with a very high IQ, I mean, absolutely genius, I don't doubt that. Doesn't mean everything they say is genius. Doesn't mean everything they say hangs together. Doesn't mean he's always going to get it right. And I really think that the way he did that video is kind of almost, dare I say, cute, because I think from his point of view as a malignant narcissist, he sees borderline women, and he mentioned borderline men in that video. That was a miracle right there. But he sees borderline women as very, very much, the narcissist, borderline, kind of like magnetic pull for many of them. Not all of them. But I wouldn't recommend that to anybody with BPD, to get pulled in to a relationship with a narcissist. And a lot of other people, BPD, like I had 4 core strong traits and I recovered 40 years ago and I healed. I believe in healing, etc. Obviously, because I know it firsthand. The thing is, though, I had a malignant narcissist father. And so, I'm not saying I know more about malignant narcissists because of that, but I do know a fair bit. I just haven't talked much about it on this channel. So I'm thinking of maybe talking more about that, because and especially where malignant narcissists can be very, very attracted to borderlines, right? So malignant narcissist woman to a borderline man, malignant narcissist like Vaknin to borderline women. And he also was talking about how normal women are like boring because they don't have the intensity of the borderline woman. I've been hearing that from clients for years. No offense, ladies, because you're not all boring. You're healthy, but you lack the intensity, as I do too, as a woman. We lack the intensity of the borderline woman, but that's a heck of a roller coaster ride, as I think many people know. So the video is troubling to me in a way, because if you're not a narcissist, if you're codependent, then you're not going to experience it the way that Vaknin would as a malignant narcissist. So interesting. I'll be lucky to see 1,000 views on this, and he'll have probably 80,000 views on that by the end of the day or a month from now. I don't know how it works or why it works that way. I mean, in general, but it does, and it's kind of interesting, and sometimes it's outright hilarious, and yet people need to be very discerning, because I don't disagree with this whole video in terms of their lives are worth living. They are important enough people that they deserve life like the rest of us. I've never been trying to say anything otherwise. But that all women are boring and that you should rather want to be in a relationship with the as he said somewhere in there, the something of the voluptuous nature of the borderline woman. No. That's not healthy for you. That's what my whole message is about. So anyway, I just thought I would do this because I just watched that video. I don't usually watch them that often, and don't like to really discuss him on this channel. I'm not saying he's like some nut that doesn't know anything, obviously, but he's often, I think, from the malignant narcissist point of view, that he is a malignant narcissist, you have to be very discerning. There's a lot of contradictions. This video of his from today would be an entire contradiction and a hard left turn from most everything else he's ever said about people with borderline personality disorder. I don't know, I don't watch all his videos, but I was going to say, except for one other video where he talks about this, I don't know, on-off miracle, sort of borderline goes away, which I think that's misinformation for sure. But, you know, he's interesting, and I know a lot of people love his work, and I'm not here to, you know, say that I could criticize all his work, but today's was a little bit much, I thought, in a way. I don't really resonate with Vaknin at all, because I don't resonate with malignant narcissist psychopaths to begin with. And secondly, I just don't. And secondly, I just think people need to be discerning. And I think that there was enough in that just made me want to say something about it, because I don't really hear absolutely the real clinicians. Unlike Vaknin is not a real psychology professor by academic achievement. He might have been name said by being a genius. I don't know. But if you listen to, or if you read the books of, or you study like I did in university, the researchers over time, you know, it's funny because in university and all the books I continue to read or look at or think, you know, I don't see, I know he's written some books, but I don't see them in the stalwart, how could I put it, academia of, you know, clinical research. I mean, I'm not there either. I don't do that type thing. But he's not there either. And if you've been with somebody with BPD, or you're wondering if you're on that edge of should I leave, should I go, or they ghosted me, am I going to get her back? You really need to take care of yourself. And these relationships are not healthy. That doesn't mean that you didn't see something of quality, of positive traits in that person with BPD, because they have those too. But overridingly in a relationship, and yes, they do have, as he said, the intensity and the creativity often. But how does that translate into a relationship where you need, you know, to know who you are, to be able to see other, you know, and people with BPD, many and without treatment, don't know who they are, and they don't see you as other, and they're seeking identity through you unconsciously, like I've always said. It doesn't work, though. And the other thing is, then they're never going to see through your perspective. They don't even hear you after you feel hurt by them. You've been hurt by them, and maybe they don't get why, but they don't take personal responsibility. Remember all this stuff as you go watch that, or if you see this after you've watched his. What I really can't jive with is the idea that BPD is just like spontaneously going to go away. Makes no sense. People can heal it, yes, but that takes treatment. People aren't just going to age out of it, and people just don't like magically remit either. And remittance doesn't mean the healed and recovered that is possible through continuing treatment. And I don't see, I see some studies wherein things are suggested, but I only see pseudoscience on the front that says people with BPD can heal in a year. People with codependency often need a little bit more than a year to heal. You tell me how somebody with BPD and all the depth of what that really means going to heal in a year. It's not true. It's not in any kind of important evidentiary factual place. He has to have duper's delight, etc., and supply that he receives from his videos, because that's what sustains who and what Vaknin really is. And I don't say that to be demeaning. It's just the truth about a malignant narcissist who, in that documentary about himself, was more than happy also that he got the label psychopath, but apparently he's not so fond of that one right now. Oh, and in this video he did say, if I were borderline, quoting Vaknin, if I were borderline, I would be like happy, whatever, glad, whatever, like whatever. He would want to unalive himself, etc. I can't remember what he said. But, oh, wait a minute. Another contradiction. Didn't he say in a video in the last 2 years sometime, yes, he did, that his major diagnosis was borderline personality disorder? And the secondary was, which that was crazy right there. I'm just saying, watch for the Swiss cheese holes, watch for the contradictions, because he's always, you know, he had autism, right, for years, right, on his channel. But the last thing I saw, now maybe he said something the opposite again, because it's hard to keep up with everything that, you know, flows, comes, goes, sways, and contradicts itself over there in what Vaknin has to offer. He said a lot about autism that was right on. And then the last video I ever saw on it was, well, don't you know people with autism are just psychopaths too? Because everybody eventually, every group, every like alphabet soup, label, whatever people can go through in life, over there with him becomes somehow narcissistic or pathological or psychopathic, which is actually, well, if it wasn't so serious, it would be really funny. But anyway, I'm not trying to say anything about all his work, but having said that, remember also, I've been online for 29 years now, as so has he. We crossed paths a couple times in which I feel like he was just being a very capable, malignant narcissist. Yeah, so it is what it is, and that was what it was, and I didn't cross his path, he crossed mine, and it doesn't matter to me one way or the other. And so that might inform a little bit about the way I feel in general, but and I've been around to watch all the iterations of all of his qualifications that disappear. But nobody now in this era, in this wokest era, nobody now is doing the work to dispute what should be disputed. And I don't really have much to say about that because I really don't care one way or the other. But I think that it's important to be really delineating. And people with BPD, I really want you to hear this from me. You hear whatever from everybody else. But if you're listening to me, please know this. They're not going to change. They're not going to be the person that you thought they were. You're in a trauma-bonded relationship. It's complicated. You need to get out of it in more cases than not. And please, focus on you. Be discerning. And seek your own healing and what you need for you. Because the cost of loving a borderline, untreated, etc., is losing yourself. Take care.